It's 3 a.m. The room is dark. Everyone else seems to be asleep, and for some reason, you're awake. Maybe you've checked the time 3 times already. Maybe you've rolled over for the 5th time. Maybe you've started wondering if something is wrong. Something wrong with your sleep. Something wrong with your brain. Because modern life teaches us a simple rule. Go to sleep. Stay asleep. Wake up in the morning. And if you wake up in the middle of the night, something must have gone wrong. But what if that's not true? What if waking up in the middle of the night isn't a malfunction at all? What if it's a memory? Because for more than 300,000 years, every human who ever lived spent roughly half their life in darkness. Not the darkness we know today. Not a darkness interrupted by streetlights, glowing windows, passing cars, or the constant glow of a screen. A deeper darkness. A darkness that arrived every evening and transformed the world. When the sun disappeared, familiar landscapes became unfamiliar. Paths vanished. Distances became uncertain. The world beyond the fire became difficult to read. And somewhere beyond the edge of the light, other eyes began to wake. Lions, hyenas, leopards, predators, perfectly adapted to a world humans could barely see. For most of human history, darkness wasn't empty space. It was pressure, a force that changed movement, changed attention, changed behavior. To step beyond the fire at night was to enter a world humans could not fully control. And because of that, something remarkable happened. People gathered together, closer to the fire, closer to one another. A fire did something strange. It divided the world into 2 parts. Inside the circle of light was safety. Outside it was uncertainty. Inside were familiar faces. Outside were sounds without shapes, movements without explanations, threats without warnings. A child sits beside the fire. Beyond the edge of the light, something moves in the grass. Nobody can see what it is. Nobody leaves the circle to find out. The darkness keeps its secrets, and for a moment, every eye turns toward the same place. Not because anyone understands what is out there, but because everyone understands what could be. The darkness pushed attention inward, toward the group, toward conversation, toward observation, toward whatever was happening inside the small island of light they had created for themselves. For thousands of generations, the pattern repeated itself. The same darkness, the same fire, the same circle of people gathered against the night. And when the dangers of the day finally faded, something unexpected happened. People did not always go straight to sleep. Many stayed awake, talking, listening, watching the flames, sharing stories, remembering the past, imagining the future. And long after those ancient worlds disappeared, traces of that behavior remained. When anthropologists began studying hunter-gatherer societies, they noticed something interesting. During the day, conversations often focused on practical problems: food, tools, travel, conflict, the immediate demands of survival. But after sunset, something changed. Stories became more common. Myths, memories, ideas, experiences, the darkness seemed to pull attention away from immediate survival and toward something larger, toward culture, toward imagination, toward shared meaning. And if that pattern repeated itself for hundreds of thousands of years, then it becomes difficult to believe the night left no mark at all. Because if the same darkness kept returning, and if humans kept gathering around the same fires, and if the same strange behaviors kept appearing after sunset, then maybe the night wasn't interrupting human life. Maybe it was helping create it, which raises an uncomfortable possibility. Maybe the night wasn't just a gap between days. Maybe it had a purpose. Maybe it was shaping us. Because if millions of humans spent hundreds of thousands of years living inside the same environment, that environment almost certainly left a mark. The question is, what was the night for? For millions of years, darkness meant the same thing. Stop moving. Stay hidden. Survive until morning. When the sun disappeared, the useful part of the day disappeared with it. The landscape did not vanish, but a human being's ability to navigate it did. Paths became uncertain. Distances became difficult to judge. And beyond the limits of human vision, predators gained the advantage. Then something changed. Fire. Not merely warmth, not merely protection. A new relationship with time. For the first time, a small piece of daylight could survive after sunset. A circle of light surrounded by darkness. A place where human activity did not have to end when the sun disappeared. The obvious explanation is survival, and survival certainly mattered. Fire provided warmth during cold nights, protection from predators, safer food. All of that is true, but survival alone doesn't explain what happened next. Because once humans could remain awake after sunset, they faced a new question, a question no other species had ever faced before. What do you do with extra time? For hundreds of thousands of years, every day had ended at darkness. Now, suddenly, part of the night belonged to humans. The day had become longer, not because the earth changed, because human life did, and that extra time would eventually become one of the most important resources our species had ever acquired. A small group sits around a fire. The hunt is over. The tools have been put away. The dangers of the day have passed. And for the first time, there is nothing urgent to do, only time. The question is what happened inside it. Because if fire gave humans extra time, eventually that time had to be filled. And whatever filled it would shape generation after generation. Because the things people do repeatedly become culture. For a long time, archaeologists could see the fires. They could see the tools. They could see the campsites. But they could not see the conversations. Words do not fossilize. Stories do not leave footprints. The most important things that happened around ancient campfires disappeared the moment they were spoken, which creates a difficult problem. How do you study conversations that ended thousands of years ago? One clue came from people whose way of life still resembled humanity's distant past. Hunter-gatherers. When anthropologists began studying hunter-gatherer communities, they noticed something interesting. The rhythm of conversation changed after sunset. During the day, most conversations focused on practical problems: food, hunting, tools, movement, survival, the immediate demands of life. But at night, something different happened. People gathered around fires. The darkness pushed attention inward, toward the group, toward one another. And the subjects of conversation began to change. Stories became more common. Myths, ancestors, relationships, dreams, imagined events, explanations about how the world worked. A child listens quietly beside the fire. An elder begins telling a story. Others already know the ending, yet they listen anyway, because the story is carrying something larger than information: memory, identity, belonging. Night after night, generation after generation, scenes like this repeated themselves, not in one place, not in one culture, but across thousands of human communities. And something important may have emerged from that pattern, because stories do something survival conversations cannot. They allow people to think about things that are not immediately present: yesterday, tomorrow, distant places, invisible forces, possible futures. The night changed what humans talked about, but perhaps more importantly, it changed what humans could think about. A hunt teaches someone how to survive. A story teaches someone how to imagine, and imagination changes everything. For perhaps the first time in history, human beings were spending hours together thinking beyond the immediate moment, beyond food, beyond danger, beyond the next sunrise. Fire had given humans time. Stories taught humans what to do with it. And once ideas could move reliably from one mind to another, something extraordinary became possible. Knowledge could survive the people who discovered it. Experience could outlive the individual. Culture could begin accumulating. A single story disappears when it ends, but a story repeated for generations becomes tradition. A tradition repeated for centuries becomes culture. A single evening changes very little, but thousands of evenings can change a species. One conversation disappears when it ends. A million conversations become culture, and culture becomes the invisible system that shapes how people think long after the fire has gone out. Which raises another question. If nights were shaping how humans thought, could they also have been shaping how humans slept? And yet, there is one part of that ancient world that may have survived. Not in stories, not in myths, not in culture, inside you. Because if the night helped shape human life for hundreds of thousands of years, it would be surprising if it left no mark on the human brain. And perhaps it didn't. Perhaps one of those marks still appears in bedrooms all over the world at 3 a.m. The same hour where this story began. The same hour millions of people find themselves awake, staring at the ceiling, checking the time, wondering what went wrong. 3:07 a.m. Tomorrow is getting closer. The harder you try to sleep, the more awake you become, and every minute feels longer than the last. Because modern life teaches us a simple rule: go to sleep, stay asleep, wake up in the morning. And if you wake up in the middle of the night, something must have gone wrong. But for most of human history, that assumption would have sounded strange. For centuries, people described sleep very differently than we do today. Not as a single, uninterrupted block, but as two separate periods. People would fall asleep shortly after dark, sleep for several hours, wake up naturally in the middle of the night, remain awake for a time, and then return to sleep until morning. Historians began noticing references to this pattern everywhere. Old diaries, medical texts, court records, religious writings. Again and again, people referred to what they called a first sleep and a second sleep, not as something unusual, as something ordinary, as though everyone understood exactly what it meant. For centuries, waking during the night was not treated as a problem. It was treated as part of sleep itself, which means one of the most common experiences of modern life may not be a malfunction at all. The strange idea is not that humans once woke up at 3 a.m. The strange idea is that we stopped. One of the researchers most closely associated with this discovery was historian Roger Ekirch. While studying historical records, he found repeated references to segmented sleep across different places and different centuries. The evidence suggested that uninterrupted sleep may not have been the historical norm many people assume it was. But historical records alone cannot tell us whether this pattern reflected biology, culture, or something else entirely, which raises an important question. If people once slept this way, could the pattern still exist? Decades later, researcher Thomas Ware conducted an experiment that produced a surprising result. Participants were exposed to long periods of darkness each day. No phones, no televisions, no artificial light extending the evening. Only a light-dark cycle, much closer to what humans experienced before modern technology. At first, their sleep was irregular, but over time, something unexpected happened. Many participants began sleeping in two distinct periods, separated by a period of quiet wakefulness, without being instructed to do so, without being taught the pattern. It appeared on its own. The pattern had returned, as though something ancient had been waiting beneath the surface. And suddenly, the historical records looked very different. If this pattern appeared in historical records, and if modern experiments can still recreate it, then a strange possibility emerges. Perhaps waking up in the middle of the night is not the mystery. Perhaps sleeping straight through the night is. Maybe what feels unusual today once felt completely ordinary. Maybe the brain you carry into bed each night was shaped by a world very different from the one you live in now. A world of darkness, firelight, stories, and long nights that unfolded differently than our own. The pattern may have disappeared from history, but it may never have disappeared from us. Which raises one final question. If this rhythm survived for centuries, what changed? For most of human history, the night remained remarkably consistent. Darkness arrived. People gathered around firelight. They slept, woke, talked, thought, and slept again. Empires rose and fell. Languages appeared and disappeared. Entire civilizations came and went, yet the night remained largely the same darkness, the same stars, the same limits imposed by sunset. Human beings adapted themselves to that world for thousands of generations. Then, in a surprisingly short period of time, the relationship began to change. At first, the change was small. A few additional sources of light, candles that burned longer, oil lamps that pushed back darkness a little further. But each improvement carried the same message. The day no longer had to end when the sun disappeared. For the first time, darkness was beginning to lose its authority. The transformation accelerated. Cities grew. Street lighting expanded. Factories demanded longer working hours. Artificial light followed humans everywhere, into homes, into streets, into factories, into the final hours of the day once claimed by darkness. The goal was not to destroy the night. The goal was convenience, productivity, safety, progress, and in many ways, it worked. Human beings became capable of extending activity far beyond sunset. Work could continue. Entertainment could continue. Communication could continue. The boundaries that had shaped human behavior for millennia began to dissolve. But every transformation has consequences. And one of the most important consequences was almost invisible. The night stopped behaving like night. A person sits beneath electric light at midnight. They answer messages, read, work, scroll. Outside, darkness still covers the landscape, but inside the room, it might as well be noon. For almost all of human history, that scene would have seemed impossible. For hundreds of thousands of years, darkness had structured human attention. It had gathered people around fires, created shared spaces, limited activity, protected periods of rest. Now those constraints were weakening. A room illuminated at midnight could feel almost identical to a room illuminated at noon. For the first time in human history, the brain could receive signals that no previous generation had regularly experienced. past. Light without sunrise. Activity without daylight. Wakefulness without fire. Humans did not conquer the night. We erased it. Not completely, but enough to fundamentally change our relationship with it. And as the environment changed, behavior changed with it. Bedtimes shifted later. Evenings stretched longer. The quiet gap between first sleep and second sleep became less common. The ancient rhythm that had survived for centuries encountered something entirely new, a world where darkness no longer controlled the schedule. The remarkable thing is how quickly this happened. Evolution works slowly. Civilizations can change quickly. Technology can change faster still. Humans spent hundreds of thousands of years adapting to the night. Then, in just a few generations, we began redesigning it. The environment surrounding the human brain transformed in just a handful of generations, far faster than biology typically adapts, which creates a fascinating possibility. Perhaps the ancient rhythm did not disappear because the brain changed. Perhaps it disappeared because the environment changed around it. The pattern may have faded from everyday life, but that does not necessarily mean it vanished from us. Because if the environment changed faster than the brain, what happens to the people living between the two? It's 3:07 a.m. You're awake. The room is dark. The house is quiet. And for most of this story, that might have felt like a problem. But now the question feels different. Because the person lying awake at 3:07 a.m. is no longer standing at the end of this documentary. They are standing in the middle of a much older story. For hundreds of thousands of years, human beings lived inside the night. Darkness was not the absence of life. It was part of life, a force that shaped attention, behavior, conversation, sleep, then fire changed the equation. A small piece of daylight survived after sunset. People gathered around it. Time expanded, and for the first time, the day did not have to end when the sun disappeared. Fire gave humans time. Stories taught humans what to do with it, night after night, generation after generation. The pattern repeated. Darkness, firelight, stories, sleep. For thousands of years, that rhythm remained remarkably stable. Empires rose. Empires fell. Languages changed. Civilizations appeared and disappeared. Yet the night remained familiar, until suddenly it didn't. The darkness that shaped human beings for thousands of generations began to retreat. Light remained after sunset. The boundaries of the night weakened. The environment changed, faster than biology, faster than evolution, faster than the human brain. And perhaps that is where this story becomes personal, because human beings do not experience the world directly. They experience it through minds shaped by older worlds, worlds that solved different problems, followed different rhythms, and lived beneath different nights, which raises a strange possibility. Maybe waking up at 3 a.m. is not unusual because it happens. Maybe it feels unusual because of the story we tell ourselves about what sleep is supposed to look like. For centuries, people treated waking in the middle of the night as ordinary. The strange idea is not that humans once woke up at 3 a.m. The strange idea is that we stopped. And if that is true, then millions of people may be interpreting an ancient experience as a modern problem. Not proof, not certainty, only a possibility. But it is a possibility worth considering, because perhaps the feeling itself is older than we think, older than bedrooms, older than clocks, older than electric light, older than the modern world. So the next time you find yourself awake at 3 a.m., staring into the darkness, wondering what went wrong, consider another possibility. Perhaps the experience belongs to a story far older than you imagine. A story that began when darkness still shaped human life, when fire extended the day, when stories filled the night, and when sleep followed a different rhythm. The night changed. The world changed. But perhaps part of the human brain is still living in an older world, not because it failed to adapt, but because adaptation takes time, and the world changed remarkably fast. So maybe the question is not, why am I awake? Maybe the question is, what kind of world was this brain expecting? And perhaps, for a brief moment in the quiet hours before morning, you are catching a glimpse of the answer.